Hi all, this is the Cross Tribune photographer Pete Thompson. I'm at the home of Tom Ostlund, talking to him about his folks Vic and Helen, who were World War II veterans.
Well, actually my parents met in the hospital in Chicago, and my mother was a nurse in Chicago at the time after she came back from the Pacific, where she took care of the wounded, and she would actually tell me stories about starving the Japanese out of the mountains, and they'd come running down and surrender and stuff, so she saw all that. And her initial service was at Fort McCoy, and that's when they had the Japanese and German prisoners up there. And both my mother and dad really did not talk a lot about it, especially my dad. He was he was in the artillery, and he was I believe when he was wounded he was in the forward observer, and at the time they were bombing the Japanese over there too. So when he was wounded, my grandparents were told that he had died in action. But then sometime later, they said that he was recovered and he was in the hospital at the time, and he was severely wounded. He was drafted, I believe, at the age of about 24, if I remember right, and was in the service for 4 years, 2 of that of which he spent in the hospital recovering from his wounds. And even after he recovered, he had some pretty severe scars. My mother was a nurse at the old Lutheran hospital after she got out of the service, and she worked delivering babies. And they were married in Chicago in 1945, and that's after he was fully recovered. And then they moved back to Minnesota, where my dad went to the WWII to get his civil engineering degree. And he worked for the state of Wisconsin as a civil engineer for 37 years before he retired at age 62. Well, one of our biggest hobbies, both for my dad and I, was deer hunting. So we made many trips out to Colorado, elk and mule deer hunting, and unfortunately that's where he passed away. We were on an elk hunt, and he passed away in Colorado at age 71. But I've always said at least he died doing what he really enjoyed doing. My dad died at 71 and she lived to be 85. And there was a 4 years difference. My mother was born in 1921, my dad in 1917. She was born in Carson City, Michigan, and my dad was born in Hibbing, Minnesota. So I guess just by the war, that's the coincidence that brought the two together, and thus it was me. And then I have a sister who's 6 years younger than me.